And with that, we say hello and welcome to CBS Sports HQ, delivered by Papa John's New Grilled Buffalo Chicken Papadilla, just $6. Alabama wins its 14th straight game against Tennessee, but unfortunately the Tide losing one of the best players in the country to injury. Here's what happened in Knoxville. Nick Saban, 13-0 straight up against Tennessee, 9-4 against the spread. Closed at 22 in favor of Alabama. The total at 66.5. And here's where the injury happened on the opening kickoff. Jalen Waddle back to field it, taken from the end zone, bringing it up to the 15-yard line, taken down and gets rolled up on. His ankle here rolled on, down in pain, hopped off the field, taken to the locker room, would go to the hospital, and Jalen Waddle out for the season with a broken ankle. He's considered a top 10 pick in next year's NFL draft. Here's Nick Saban at halftime.
He's out for the year, and it's a shame because the guy's a great player. It's exciting for college football to see a guy play like that. I hate it that he gets hurt on a play like that. You know, not supposed to bring a ball out when you're that deep in the end zone, but he's a great player, so you know you got to let him use his judgment.
Not supposed to bring a ball that deep in the end zone, but he's a great player, so you have to let him use his judgment. More on that in a moment. Meantime, Alabama has to keep on going. Najee Harris up the middle for the touchdown at 7-0 Tide. 13 straight quarters with a touchdown for Najee Harris. And he wasn't the only one getting the job done. Mac Jones over to Slade Bolden. Pick up a 22 yards. Alabama back in business. Next play, let's go back to Slade here. Over the middle, 17-yard reception. 3 straight games of over 400 yards passing for Mac Jones. He started 11 for 11, 184 yards in a groove. Later in the drive, Brian Robinson Jr. up the middle. It was ground and pound for Alabama all afternoon in Knoxville. 21-3 Alabama. Second rushing touchdown in the last 3 games for him. 11th career rushing touchdown for Robinson. Late second quarter, Mac Jones up top and deep to John Mechie III, and they're going to need him to have a whole lot of production with Jalen Waddle out for the season. 2 plays later, Najee Harris untouched, in for 6 into the checkerboard end zone there at Neyland Stadium. Getting the job done. Second of 3 touchdowns of the game. And then third play of the third quarter, Eric Gray fumbles the football. It's the freshman Malachi Moore. Scoop and score, 28-yard fumble return for the score. Alabama up 35-10 at that point. Vols' 8th turnover of the season. They had 0 zippy turnovers in the first 2 games. Alabama scoring 35 points in 18 straight games, extending the longest streak in college football history. Alabama rolls 48-17. Nick Saban now 23-0 against former assistants, finishing up a 4-week stretch of facing former assistants. Jimbo Fisher, Lane Kiffin, Kirby Smart, now Jeremy Pruitt. Jalen Waddle here is the big story as he is out for the season, leading receiver, and again, he is considered a top 10 pick in next year's NFL draft. Najee Harris picking up the load here, 14 rushing touchdowns this season. That's the most by an Alabama player through the team's first 5 games of a season in school history. It's Najee's 3rd game this season with 3 rushing touchdowns, 4th career game with 3 or more rushing touchdowns. So pretty impressive for Najee Harris as Alabama covers the 22. Game does go under the total. Chip Emery and Danny Kanell all picked Alabama earlier on HQ, known as a Lock Unity on the Cover 3 podcast. All right, let's get some instant analysis here as we welcome in 2-time Super Bowl champ Bryant McFadden, CBS Sports HQ college football analyst Barrett Sallee, and Chip Patterson. And Nick Saban said at halftime, Barrett, quote, "I hate that Waddle gets hurt on a play. Not supposed to bring a ball out when he's that deep in the end zone." What did you make of those comments at halftime from Nick Saban?
Oh, he's right. It was a little unnecessary, very unnecessary, because obviously Jalen Waddle had just gotten transported to the hospital. So it was very unnecessary. People are going to say it's a bad look, and it is a bad look. You don't need to talk about something like that when a player has his future in doubt. I mean, we can say that about Jalen Waddle. So, you know, I know coaches in those situations, they are in the heat of the moment. So I don't want to necessarily say, you know, that he's an awful person or it's just Saban being Saban. A lot of times your mind's moving a lot faster than your mouth is. You can't pay attention. You're not necessarily thinking straight. I hope that's what happened here, but there's no doubt he shouldn't have said that. But also Jalen Waddle should not have taken that ball out of the end zone.
Jalen Waddle as a special teams threat is why this is not a normal injury and a loss for Alabama, because he is one of the unique talents, not just at the college football level, but really in all of football. When you talk about just the ball in his hands at any place on the field, there's the potential for a touchdown. He's got that kind of breakaway speed. He's got that kind of explosiveness. And so, the fact that this happened in the special teams play, he's not the kind of player that you would want to keep from playing special teams, because ever since he arrived in Tuscaloosa, when he was a freshman, when he was in Knoxville for this game 2 years ago as a true freshman, he had to be on the field because he was the most electric and the most athletic player in terms of being able to run back kicks and run back punts. It is very heartbreaking for Jalen Waddle, the person. It is a big-time setback for Alabama for special teams and also for the wide receiver position. I'm sure we're going to break that down a lot more later. But I think that the fact that this happened within the context of a special teams play, you cannot think that he necessarily should not have been out there, because ever since he showed up, he has always been the #1 special teams threat. He is the #1 special teams threat in all of college football, and that's why it's a bummer to see him go.
Yeah, one of the most exciting and dynamic players in the country, averaging nearly 140 yards per game, the leading receiver for this Alabama receiving corps. And Ryan Wilson, our CBS Sports NFL draft expert, has Jalen Waddle going 8th overall, so a lock in terms of a first-round selection, first wide receiver off the board for Ryan. We know how good Jalen Waddle is. We know the impact that he has on this Alabama team, and he will be sorely missed this season. Again, out for the season with a broken ankle. All right, let's get back out to Knoxville. Welcome in lead sideline reporter for the SEC on CBS, Jamie Erdahl. And Jamie, not the kind of news we want to talk about post-game, certainly about a guy like Jalen Waddle, who we all love to watch every Saturday, out for the year. What more can you tell us?
I can tell you the team seemed down, and the fact that that play happened on the very first kickoff return, the very first play of this day, I think really tells you a lot about this Alabama team and the character that they have. That young man is a high profile athlete, but also a high character kind of guy. Easy to have in the locker room, easy to be around, and you really felt that. I felt a deflated energy Alabama sideline, but what makes a good team better is when they can come together in a moment like that and respond the way that they did. I swear, if you watch the game tape back, I think the next 3 plays went to Slade Bolden, who is kind of a logical next man up mentality on that initial drive for Alabama, which is truly impressive for Mac Jones to see in terms of his comfort within this offense. But it was a hard thing to watch Alabama go through this, and especially for that young man get ambulanced out of the stadium here.
Jamie, how does this impact Alabama for the rest of the season? I mean, this is a program that always has national title implications, and now you take a player off the roster because of injury. Now they've got to figure out how to replace him and his production.
Well, here's the thing. I asked Nick Saban this before the game started, just how challenging this season is, in particular when you have an all-SEC schedule. You don't let up the gas pedal here. This team has a game next week, a bye, and then they go to LSU. I mean, talk about an absolute gauntlet. It's a challenge for Alabama, but they wouldn't be themselves if they didn't have another option. I think you see Najee Harris just continue to expand in the run game here, but another name is going to emerge. I think that's what makes Alabama and Nick Saban so special, so deep. This team is going to lick their wounds a little bit without Jalen Waddle, but again, if you know him, you know he's going to be around and making sure his teammates don't look back at him, but instead look ahead in what their aspirations are this season.
Jamie, appreciate your work here on CBS Sports HQ and on the SEC on CBS each and every week. Appreciate the update and the news.
Thanks, guys.
And as Jamie mentioned, a guy that's going to have to step up here, and a guy that we're going to hear a lot from, is John Mechie III, the sophomore. 7 catches for 151 yards. And then, of course, Slade Bolden getting some work this afternoon as well. 6 catches for 94 yards. We know Devontae Smith is one of the best receivers in the country. 7 catches for 73 yards. But John Mechie now going to be expected to step up for this Alabama receiving corps week in and week out, with Jalen Waddle out for the season because of a broken ankle. All right, back with our experts, Bryant McFadden, Chip Patterson, Barrett Sallee, and BMAC. I want to get you involved in this. Jalen Waddle, one of your favorite players to watch. We talk about him every week here on CBS Sports HQ. I know he's a guy that certainly he would give guys in the NFL in terms of defensive backs headaches to defend. When you saw him go down, when you saw his decision to come out of the end zone, what were you thinking at that point when you saw him get injured, and then ultimately the decision to come out of the end zone? We know Nick, in terms of what he said, didn't really agree and not a great look, but this is a huge impact player for Alabama, now done for the year.
The injury clearly was devastating because it ended his 2020 season. He will go through the rehab process, and we're hoping that he's able to get back to being the player he was before the injury. But from the individual standpoint, this is a guy that has NFL aspirations. We believe he will be a first-round selected player in this upcoming draft. He has that type of talent. He has the skill set, and he is a difference maker, not just on the offensive side, but through special teams. I mean, he's a valuable player, and because of his value when it comes to special teams, he decided to bring the football out of the end zone. And me personally, there are a handful of guys that play unique positions that the normal rules don't usually apply to them, right? NFL player, special teams guy, Cordell Patterson, plays for the Chicago Bears. He is bringing the football out every time. He has that leeway to do so because at any given time he touches the football, he can take it to the house. Jalen Waddle has the same ability. And I heard what Nick Saban said. I don't agree with it as a fan of the game, as a former player of the game, because that was the wrong time to bring that up. If you felt that way, I think you should keep that internally and voice it to the team, to the healthy guys, whoever the new returner is. Remember what our rules and our guidelines are when it comes to bringing the football out of the end zone. But me personally, Nick Saban would not have brought this up if he brought it out of the end zone and he took it 50 or 60 or 70 yards and he didn't get injured. We know why this was brought up at that appointed time because of the injury, and clearly Nick Saban was feeling some type of way because of what happened. Me personally, it's a part of the game, unfortunately, and if that was an unwritten rule when it comes to the special team side of Alabama, I really felt like it would have been better to keep it inside the locker room instead of making that a public statement for all of us to talk about.
Well, there is hope. There certainly is motivation for Jalen Waddle. Of course, his own teammate from last year, Tua Tagovailoa, with a serious hip injury, knocked him out for the rest of the season, and still taken in the first round, 5th overall by the Miami Dolphins. And now he's going to make his first start on Sunday, in the following week when they come back from the bye. So that's some motivation for Jalen Waddle. He could still be a top 10 pick, but certainly wanted to finish this season. And it's certainly heartbreaking for the young man who was going to continue to lead this team in receiving yards. Now, Barrett, we switch to the guy that they're going to call upon, and we saw him earlier this season against Texas A&M breakout, had 181 yards receiving. Today, he has 151 yards receiving against Tennessee and John Mechie III, and the sophomore can really fill in here for Jalen Waddle rest of way.
Yeah, he really can. John Mechie III's been a great player throughout the course of the entire season, and now you look at what he did. I mean, he knew that Jalen Waddle was out at least for the game when he went down. So he became that clear-cut number 2, and look what he was able to do. I mean, look, Tennessee has to pay attention to Devontae Smith. They have to double-team Devontae Smith. So Mechie got a lot of one-on-one coverage. He was able to exploit that. Mac Jones knows exactly. It seems like those guys have a really good connection. He knows exactly where he's going to be. So, yeah, in terms of the real football aspect of this moving forward, I don't really think – obviously, it sucks to lose Jalen Waddle, and there will be a little bit of a drop-off. But, I mean, Alabama's loaded. You saw on that graphic, Slade Bolden. Slade Bolden is a guy that no one ever talked of at all about being a playmaker, and then suddenly he has a great day today, again, knowing that Jalen Waddle is out. So I think from a pure football perspective, again, you hate what happened to Jalen Waddle, but from a football perspective, they've got the weapons. This is why Alabama is a machine. This is why that they keep stacking great player on great player on great player through recruiting. It's so they have the kind of depth that they can use throughout the course of the season if you do get an injury like this. So John Mechie III, man, if you're talking, it's like they just clone receivers. It's like Jerry Jeudy's gone. Oh, okay, here's a clone that we built somewhere on that campus, and it's the exact same guy. It's really impressive what he's been able to do.
So I'm really looking at two people right now. I'm looking at Steve Sarkisian, the offensive coordinator. How are you going to put together different game plans? How does the absence of Jalen Waddle change your play calling? Because the absence of Jalen Waddle absolutely changes the way that defensive coordinators prepare for you. And they change the way that defensive coordinators call their game going up against Mac Jones and the rest of this Crimson Tide passing attack. The other thing I'm looking at is Slade Bolden. And I think that you look at his performance here, he was targeted 7 times. He caught 6 of those 7 targets, nearly 100 receiving yards. You are going to be stepping up because John Mechie III needs to be on one side. You need to have Devonta Smith on the other. That leaves Bolden in an opportunity to get advantageous matchups against players he is either faster than or players that are not going to be the right size. And so I think that's going to make him an incredible piece to watch moving forward as we think about the different ways that Alabama adjusts. But again, I do think a lot's going to be back on the play caller, because you lose Waddle, you change the way that a defense defends you, and that means you need to have a wrinkle. It's always about passing the chalk, right? Isn't that what we hear from coaches, that you just pass the chalk back and forth and there's different adjustments? Well, now this is a major adjustment that is a setback for the Crimson Tide. This is where Sarkisian really needs to rise to the occasion.
And they got a guy that's setting them up for success in Mac Jones. Nearly 4 straight games with 400 yards. He comes up 13 yards shy of another 400-yard passing game. Yeah, no touchdowns through the air, but he got it done again. I mean, he continues to help this offense that's averaging nearly 49 points per game, which is incredible. And B-Mac, when you consider what Mac Jones is able to do, what does he do? Now he's allowing the ground game to be ground and pound for Najee Harris, who rushed for 3 touchdowns in this game.
I mean, that just goes to show you the elite players that Alabama has been recruiting over the last 3-4 years and how they develop these guys to get the most out of them any given Saturday. So they have star after star. And I think that is the unique thing about Alabama and why many people believe they're the best team in college football, because the depth they have, especially on the offensive side. It's not just about Najee Harris. I mean, what about Brian Robertson? He's going to be a drafted player whenever he decides to go pro. And then we saw Sanders jump into the forefront. Remember, he was a 5-star kid that got injured last year that people feel like he could be the most athletic running back on their roster. So they're extremely deep on all 3 levels offensively. The same could be said defensively. And I think that is something that we have to monitor as well. Remember, I said during the pregame show, the second half display of production their defense provided against UGA is something that I think would carry over in today's ball game against Tennessee, and that's something that we saw. I mean, we saw the same consistency, we saw the same energy. They were flying around, playing on the opposite side of the line of scrimmage, and if that defense continues to play that way, we know offensively what they're going to be able to do. They're going to score anywhere between the mid-40s or the low 50s based on their opponent. But if their defense can continue to grow and be consistent and play with the right gap integrity and force turnovers, they're going to be a very, very difficult ball game for any elite team in college football right now currently. So that is something to monitor as well. But I like what I saw from Mac Jones, guys, because I think based on what we've seen from Mac Jones throughout his time there starting at Alabama, this probably was his best pro tape. He didn't throw 1 touchdown. But when you look at the change of energy when their most explosive player was out of the ball game, and then he had to get the most out of guys like John Mechie and Slade Bolden. Guys stepped up, but he also made it easy for them to step up because he was dropping dime after dime. And I think this is something to take away from Mac Jones when you look at his pro potential. Me personally, this was his best pro tape.
Yeah, he had only 6 incompletions in this game. I mean, it's really incredible to see what he did this afternoon. Meantime, Nick Saban's record is perfect. Blemish-free, 23-0 against former assistants as he takes down former Alabama defensive coordinator Jeremy Pruitt. And Barrett, we talk about, you know, these assistants going to these programs that they're in rebuild mode, right? That's right. That's why they're going there, right? That's what they're supposed to do. Jeremy Pruitt trying to build things back up in Knoxville. They start the season 2-0. Now they've lost 3 in a row here. How far away is Tennessee from competing with the Alabamas and the Georgias of the SEC?
Very far. I mean, Tennessee right now, from a personnel perspective, it's not even close. I mean, I can't even think of one position group or really one player who would start on Alabama's team that currently plays for the Orange and White. So yeah, they're way far away. And I think when you saw all of that happen with Greg Schiano and Schiano Saturday and Jeremy Pruitt getting the job, Tennessee fans sort of married themselves to a full rebuild. And I know patience is not a word that Tennessee fans like to hear at all because they've had to endure a lot over the last 10 years. But that's what they have to do. Jeremy Pruitt is recruiting well. That is step one. He's figuring out how to be a head coach. He has some ups, he has some downs. That's going to happen. So it's impossible to say, Jeremy, go be Nick Saban. Like that's not something that's realistic. It's not going to happen. Not at Tennessee, not at Florida, not at USC, nowhere, because Nick Saban's the best coach of all time. But they can be competitive, like Kirby Smart has become at Georgia. I think that's the next step for Tennessee. But still, it's going to take probably 3 or 4 more great, not good, great recruiting classes before it's even a possibility.
I'm all looking at one position. I mean, this is 2020. This is the modern college football game. Tennessee has a different quarterback. We're having a different conversation. 3 straight losses: Georgia, Kentucky, Alabama. We didn't expect maybe Georgia or Alabama, but what was the one theme that came out of that loss to Kentucky? Jarrett Guarantano just ain't it. He just doesn't have the goods to be able to win at the SEC level. And you look at Tennessee's quarterback room, and clearly there is not anybody else in that room that the offensive staff feels really confident in. And so Tennessee just doesn't have a quarterback to be able to win at a high level. Yes, you can build up the offensive line like Tennessee has done. Yes, you can recruit strong defensive players in a way like Henry Toto has really stood out as a breakout player for me in the SEC. But it's 2020. It is the modern college football game. If you don't have a difference maker at the quarterback position, you cannot measure yourself against Alabama. You cannot measure yourself against the best teams in the country. And Tennessee is always going to measure itself against Georgia, Florida, and Alabama. And right now, Tennessee is a quarterback and probably a couple recruiting classes short from being able to take down all 3 of those opponents.
And just to piggyback off what Chip just alluded to, it's not just about being a good quarterback. You got to have a pro-like quarterback. I think that could be the consensus for all the other teams in the SEC. If you're trying to compete with Alabama, if you're trying to beat Alabama, you got to have a pro-like player that's playing quarterback for your team. Remember last year, the team that slapped Alabama in the face. Their quarterback, Joe Burrow, yes, he won the Heisman, but he was a pro-like player. I mean, look at some of the battles we saw with Alabama and Clemson. You remember who the quarterback was? Okay, Deshaun, Trevor, both of those guys will play. Well, one is already playing in the National Football League. We know what Trevor Lawrence will be doing in the next few months or whatever next year, playing in the NFL. I mean, Johnny Manziel, Cam Newton. You got to have a pro-like player, and you can even go back to last week's ball game against UGA. Stetson Bennett is a real good story. It's a feel-good story for college football for the SEC. But if he was a pro-like player at the quarterback position for UGA, there's a good chance we probably would have seen a closer ball game, maybe even a different outcome. That has been the difference for Alabama. They're getting pro-like players at the most important position, and because of that, their offense has shot through the roof. Tua last year, you got Mac Jones, who will be a draftable player in my opinion, not to mention with all the stars that are surrounding them. If you don't have a pro-like player at the most important position, good luck.
Yeah, good luck facing Alabama if you're unranked too. Alabama has now won 93 straight games against unranked opponents. 93 straight games against unranked opponents. It's silly. Hey, check out BMAC on his podcast, All Things Covered, joined by former LSU star and Cardinals corner Patrick Peterson. And check out Chip Patterson, his crew on the Cover 3 podcast. Their weekly lock segment is a fan favorite. All of them on Alabama. Straight cash, knowledge in your mind, money in your pocket. All Things Covered, Cover 3 podcast. Download and subscribe today.
Want a sports network that delivers everything that matters about the game? The highlights, the picks, the instant analysis. No yelling, no fake debates, no politics. Hit the subscribe button and never miss a moment.